The Valley of Mexico, nestled high in the Central Highlands, was once a place of deep stillness and natural wonder. Long before Tenochtitlan rose from the lake, this land held quiet beauty. Surrounded by misty volcanoes and sacred mountains, the valley shimmered with freshwater lakes, marshes alive with birdsong, and thick forests that whisper with the wind. Here, the dawns were golden, the air thin and clean, and each morning seemed touched by divine breath. It was a land that asked to be honored, and the people who came would answer that call with devotion. This land was not empty. Long before the Aztecs, others lived here: Toltecs, Teotihuacanos, and unknown peoples who left their marks in stone and story. Their ruins still stood in silence when the Mexica entered the scene, as if waiting to pass down forgotten truths. The valley, then, was not just geography. It was memory, echo, and spirit. Each rock, each tree, was alive with presence. The Mexica would listen, and they would learn, shaping their civilization from the whispers of this sacred ground. The lakes of the valley were especially central, calm mirrors that reflected the heavens above. The largest, Lake Texcoco, would one day cradle Tenochtitlan itself. But even in earlier times, the lakes were places of balance. Waterfowl circled overhead. Reeds and lilies swayed in the breeze. People gathered fish, collected salt, and carved canoes from trees to glide across still waters. Life here moved with a rhythm that felt eternal, measured by rainfall, harvest, and sunrise. Animals roamed the forests and plains. Jaguars padded through shadows. Deer stepped softly between trees, and serpents curled under stones. The people who would become the Aztecs saw these creatures not just as beasts, but as guides and omens, symbols of gods and powers greater than themselves. Nature, to them, was never silent. It spoke in signs and rustling leaves, in the cry of an eagle overhead. These messages would shape their worldview and later, their religion. And so the valley waited, patient and poised, as the Mexica made their way southward. The land was ready to receive a new story, a new people who would rise from wandering strangers to empire builders. This place, so rich in water, light, and ancestral memory, would cradle one of the most remarkable civilizations the world has ever known. And in its stones, shadows, and sky, the Aztec dream would soon take root. The story of the Mexica, who would later be known as the Aztecs, begins not in the Valley of Mexico, but far to the north, in a mythical place called Aztlan. Described in oral tradition and painted codices, Aztlan was a shimmering land of 7 caves, or tribes, a place of origin cloaked in mystery and spiritual significance. From this sacred homeland, the Mexicans set out on a migration that would last generations. Guided by visions and omens, they believed their journey had divine purpose, a destiny promised by the gods themselves. The journey from Aztlan was not a straight line, but a long wandering. The Mexica moved through deserts, forests, and valleys, sometimes welcomed, often rejected by other tribes. Along the way, they carved symbols into stone, held ceremonies under the stars, and built temporary camps that felt like echoes of home. This constant movement strengthened their identity. They were the people who would not settle until the gods gave a sign. Their name, Mexica, echoed their devotion to the god Mexi or Huitzilopochtli, who would lead them to greatness. The god Huitzilopochtli was not just a distant force, but a constant companion. Priests carried a sacred bundle, wrapped in feathers and mystery, as they marched. Through dreams and omens, flights of birds, patterns in the sky, he guided them. Huitzilopochtli represented the sun, the warrior spirit, and divine fire. Under his watch, the Mexica learned discipline and endurance. Even in hardship, they believed their path was sacred, and that every trial brought them closer to their destined home. As the generations passed, elders told stories of where they had come from and where they were going. These tales were not merely history. They were the fabric of identity. Children grew up hearing of sacred caves, of miraculous signs, and the final resting place promised to their people. The migration itself became a ritual of remembrance. Every step forward was a step deeper into purpose, into myth, into destiny. Eventually, weary but resolute, the Mexica arrived at the Valley of Mexico. They were seen by others as poor, uncultured, and latecomers to a region already rich with history. But they carried something powerful: faith, unity, and a belief that they were chosen. Though they had yet to find the promised sign, the land itself seemed to vibrate with potential. Their arrival was not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter in the sacred story of a people. The sign they had long awaited came in the form of a dream painted into reality. An eagle perched atop a cactus, devouring a snake, set against the gleam of Lake Texcoco. This was not merely a natural sight. It was prophecy revealed. According to legend, Huitzilopochtli had promised that when they saw this vision, they were to settle and build their city. The Mexica, after years of wandering, now stood before the shimmering waters of the lake, witnessing a divine message that would define their future. The island and the lake became their sacred claim. They began building not just a city, but a vision of heaven reflected on earth. The lake itself became part of the city's design, with canals crisscrossing the growing settlement. At the heart of the island, they built temples of stone and earth, raising them layer by layer as they honored the gods with each stone placed. This new city, Tenochtitlan, which means the place of the prickly pear cactus, was more than a capital. It was a fulfillment of cosmic promise, grounded in sacred geography. Though their beginnings were humble, the Mexico worked tirelessly. They dredged mud from the lake to create land. They used wooden stakes to anchor their structures, and through innovation and devotion, transformed the island into a thriving center. The reflection of temples in the lake at dawn was said to make it seem as though the gods themselves walked among them. Every step forward in their construction was marked by prayer, ceremony, and the sense that they were building a bridge between earth and sky. As Tenochtitlan grew, so did its identity. The people planted gardens, built causeways to connect to the mainland, and constructed schools and temples. Trade flourished. Rituals echoed in the plazas. Birds sang over canals. And the city seemed to float like a jewel upon the lake's mirror. Though they were once dismissed as outsiders, the Mexica had carved a place not only in the land but in the story of the world. Tenochtitlan had become a living temple, a sacred city rising from water, vision, and devotion. And so it was that the long migration ended not in exhaustion but in triumph. From vision to manifestation, from prophecy to stone, the founding of Tenochtitlan was a moment of divine completion. In the heart of the valley, on that sacred island, a civilization now took root. One whose temples would rise toward the heavens and whose stories, still whispered in dreams, would echo long after the stones had fallen. Tenochtitlan soon evolved into one of the most breathtaking cities the world had ever seen. At its heart stood the Templo Mayor, a grand twin pyramid rising from the island, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. Around it, smaller temples, schools, and sacred plazas radiated outward like ripples on water. But this was not a city of stone alone. It was alive with music, color, scent, and movement. Canals laced the neighborhoods, lined with flower-draped homes and bustling marketplaces. It was often said that visitors from faraway lands would stand speechless at the beauty of the place. The daily life of the people reflected balance and rhythm. Mornings began with ritual sweeping of homes and doorways, a symbolic clearing of energy. Merchants pushed canoes filled with goods, while children laughed as they splashed water over their faces from clay bowls. The markets were full of color, ripe fruit, fragrant cacao, brilliant woven cloth. One could hear poets reciting in Nahuatl beside flute players, their sounds drifting through the city like songbirds. Even the mundane felt sacred in Tenochtitlan. Each task was a small offering to the gods. Temples weren't only places for worship. They were centers of learning. Calmecacs and Telpacalis served as schools for children, with boys and girls learning history, philosophy, farming, and ritual song. Education was both spiritual and practical. Priests trained the youth not just in words and numbers, but in discipline, silence, and inner strength. In the hush of the Calmecac courtyards, one might hear the low chant of prayer or the soft scratch of quills on bark paper scrolls. Knowledge was sacred, and passing on was considered an act of devotion. Sacred rituals punctuated the flow of time. At key moments of the calendar, eclipses, equinoxes, harvests, the city would pause to honor the gods. Dancers in feathered headdresses moved in circles, their steps echoing the paths of the stars. Incense curled toward the heavens, and drums throbbed like the heartbeat of the earth. Offerings of maize, flowers, and sacred smoke filled the plazas. Even if one could not see the gods, they were there, in the rhythm, the flame, the breath of the dancers. In this city of canals and temples, of ritual and rhythm, the people lived in harmony with the sacred. Life flowed like the waters beneath their feet, steady, reflective, and filled with meaning. Tenochtitlan was not just a political capital. It was a spiritual mirror of the universe, crafted with care and conviction. In the hush of evening, When the city glowed with torchlight and the song from a prayer filled the air, it felt less like a place and more like a dream made real. At the heart of Aztec society was the powerful rhythm of their sacred calendar, a system that guided every aspect of life. This wasn't simply a way to count days, but a divine framework that linked humans, nature, and gods in an eternal cycle. The Tanaup Wali, or 260-day ritual calendar, was used to determine the destiny of each individual, ceremonial dates, and priestly duties. Parallel to it was the Zayapo Wali, a 365-day agricultural calendar, which tracked the seasons, rains, and harvests. Time itself was sacred, a divine presence woven into the very structure of their world. Each day had a unique character, a combination of a number and a day sign, such as 3 serpent or 9 house, that influenced the fate of births, ceremonies, and even war. Priests interpreted these signs like ancient astronomers and spiritual guides. They were consulted for naming children, planning marriages, and choosing the proper days for planting or battle. The days were living entities, with moods and energies of their own, and those born under their influence carried their essence throughout life. It created a society deeply attuned to cosmic rhythms. As seasons changed, so too did the ceremonies that gave life rhythm. The solar calendar was divided into 18 months of 20 days, each with its own deity and festival. There was a festival of rain, honoring Tlaloc, the Feast of Fire for Xicotencatli, the harvest celebration for Xilanin, goddess of maize. These rituals synchronized the city with celestial order. Time wasn't a straight path. It was a circle, a return. And with each cycle, the people renewed their bond with creation, sacrifice, and cosmic balance. The calendar was also a guide to transformation. Every 52 years, the cycles of the 2 calendars aligned, a moment of cosmic tension and renewal known as the binding of the years. As the final day approached, fires across the empire were extinguished. The people waited in silence, fearing that the sun might not rise again. At midnight, priests atop a sacred mountain lit a new fire in the chest of a sacrificial victim. If the flame caught and the sun returned, the cycle would begin anew, and the entire world would exhale in relief. This reverence for time, its beauty and dread, shaped the Aztec spirit. To them, time wasn't a background. It was a divine force, demanding respect and ritual. Life was not lived linearly, but in sacred cycles, echoing the births and deaths of suns, gods, and civilizations. Every moment was a thread in the great woven fabric of eternity, and the calendar was their map, a glowing script from the gods, guiding their every breath. In Aztec society, gods were not distant entities. They were intimate, present forces woven into every layer of existence. The pantheon was vast, but each deity held a clear role in maintaining the balance between life, death, creation, and destruction. Chief among them was Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, whose fiery journey across the sky was powered by sacrifice. Alongside him stood Tlaloc, the rain-bringer, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of wisdom and wind, and Tezcatlipoca, the god of fate and sorcery. Together, they governed the elements and emotions of daily life. Huitzilopochtli was both feared and revered. His journey as the sun was perilous, and he required strength through offerings to rise each day. Warriors who died in battle were believed to join him in the sky, aiding his celestial fight. The Templo Mayor's southern side was dedicated to him, where blood and flame honored his power. Sacrifice was not cruelty, it was cosmic necessity. Without nourishment, the sun could falter, and the world would plunge into eternal darkness. In this worldview, life was a debt owed to the divine. In contrast, Tlaloc ruled with water and thunder. His image was carved with wide eyes and fanged lips, and he was both generous and wrathful. Children were sometimes sacrificed to him in hopes of rain, their tears believed to bring the clouds. While terrifying, Tlaloc's realm was also lush. He governed the mountains, springs, and agricultural bounty. Farmers offered maize and flowers, singing prayers into wind. His mountain paradise, Tlalocan, was a place of eternal bloom, where those who died by lightning or water found peace. Quetzalcoatl stood as a contrast to his more violent counterparts, a creator deity. He symbolized learning, breath, and artistry, often depicted with feathers and wind swirls. He was a gentle god who gave maize to humanity and taught sacred knowledge. Priests in his temple studied astronomy and time, and artists painted his likeness in sweeping curves. His disappearance in the world was mourned, but his return was prophesied. a tale that would ripple centuries later when strangers from across the sea arrived under sails. All these gods lived in constant tension and harmony, just like the people who worshipped them. Life was seen as an echo of the gods' dramas, and every act, from planting corn to waging war, was a reenactment of divine cycles. In the temples and in the home, the presence of the gods was felt in shadow and light, storm and calm. To live in the Aztec world was to walk among the divine, always aware that the sacred pulsed beneath the surface of the ordinary. The Aztecs viewed sacrifice not as cruelty, but as a sacred exchange that sustained the universe. In their cosmology, the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humans were expected to repay this debt through offerings, often of blood, the most potent life force. The continuation of the sun's journey, the renewal of rain, and the fertility of crops were all seen as contingent on the ritual spilling of blood. This wasn't limited to war captives. Even priests and rulers would draw blood from their tongues or ears in acts of devotion. The Templo Mayor was the heart of these rituals. Towering above Tenochtitlan, it stood like a ladder between earth and heaven. During festivals, the steps would be painted red, and thousands would gather to witness sacrificial rites. Victims, often captured warriors, were treated with reverence, believed to be chosen by the gods. They were given food, gifts, and paraded with honor before being laid on the stone altar. As the obsidian blade fell, drums beat like thunder, and incense curled to heavens, carrying the soul upward. Beyond the grand ceremonies, smaller household rituals were just as vital. Families kept altars at home, offering tamales, flowers, and droplets of blood during calendrical festivals. These daily devotions kept the cosmic balance intact. Women made offerings to fertility goddesses for safe childbirth. Merchants prayed to Yakatacutli, god of travelers, before departing. Even the act of grinding maize for tortillas was accompanied by whispered thanks to Chicumcotl, goddess of sustenance. In this way, every act of life became infused with sacred meaning. Sacrifice also played a central role in festivals that synchronized human life with the cycles of time. During the festival of Tlaquexapolizli, dedicated to Xipe-Totec, captured warriors were dressed in flayed skins, symbolizing agricultural rebirth. Combat duels were staged, representing the struggle of life against death. The blood that flowed during these rituals wasn't viewed as tragedy. It was seen as nourishment to the gods and a reaffirmation of cosmic balance. Death, in this belief system, was not an end but a transformation. To outsiders, these rituals may seem harsh, but to the Aztecs, they were acts of sacred responsibility. They believed that without offerings, the sun would stall, the rains would stop, and darkness would engulf the world. Through sacrifice, they gave themselves to sustain creation. In every drop of blood, there was reverence. In every rising chant, a hope for renewal. And in every life offered, a return to the gods who had once offered theirs. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, a vibrant market thrived at Tlatelolco, a reflection of the Aztec world's incredible economic and cultural sophistication. Far from the stereotype of a purely war-driven society, the Aztecs maintained a complex, interconnected system of trade, where goods from across the empire flowed into the capital. Every day, thousands gathered in the market plaza to barter for food, textiles, tools, feathers, obsidian, cacao beans, and even exotic animals. This marketplace wasn't only an engine of commerce, it was a mirror of empire, displaying the diversity of cultures and landscapes united under Aztec rule. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, a vibrant market thrived at Tlatelolco, a reflection of the Aztec world's incredible economic and cultural sophistication. Far from the stereotype of a purely war-driven society, the Aztecs maintained a complex, interconnected system of trade, where goods from across the empire flowed into the capital. Every day, thousands gathered in the market plaza to barter for food, textiles, tools, feathers, obsidian, cacao beans, and even exotic animals. This marketplace wasn't only an engine of commerce, it was a mirror of empire, displaying the diversity of cultures and landscapes united under Aztec rule. Cacao beans were one of the most important currencies in this system. While the Aztecs lacked metal coinage, their economic activity thrived using cacao, cotton cloaks, and quetzal paper as standardized units of exchange. A rabbit might cost 30 cacao beans, a turkey egg 3. Nobles drank cacao as a foamy, bitter beverage, often flavored with chili or flowers. To sip cacao was to sip wealth. The beans also had symbolic value, linked to fertility, prosperity, and trade blessings from gods like Yakutacutli. The market was also a place of performance, law, and diplomacy. Poets and musicians performed, judges settled disputes, and public announcements echoed across the square. Different sections were arranged according to type. Fishmongers in one row, spice sellers in another, goldsmiths in yet another. The entire enterprise was orderly, with inspectors ensuring fairness in measurement and honesty in trade. This harmony of commerce reflected the broader order the Aztecs sought to impose across their realm, a civilization built not only on conquest but coordination. Tlatelolco was more than a marketplace. It was a cultural crossroads. Goods from coastal villages, mountain cities, and jungle outposts came together, mingling people of many languages and customs. While the Aztecs often ruled by force, their empire was also held together by these delicate threads of trade and ritual exchange. Each transaction was not only economic, it was ceremonial, and in every pouchy cacao, every quetzal feather, there was the echo of distant lands and the enduring pulse of an empire in motion. Time was sacred to the Aztecs, and their calendars reflected a deeply spiritual relationship with the cosmos. Rather than a single timeline, they followed two interlocking cycles. The Tanap Wali, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Xiapo Wali, a 365-day solar calendar. The former guided ceremonies, divinations, and the destinies of individuals based on their birth dates. Each day carried its own symbol, deity, and meaning. The Xiapo Wali, tied to agricultural seasons, marked the rhythm of planting, harvest, and festivals. Together, these calendars did not just measure time, they shaped reality itself. The Tanap Wali was composed of 20-day signs and 13 numbers, rotating in complex sequences to form a complete 260-day cycle. Each day had a divine patron, influencing the fates of those born under its sign. People believed their names, character, and even death were shaped by these invisible forces. The day one death, for example, might lead to a contemplative life, while nine wind could produce a persuasive orator. Tanopuk, or daykeepers, were respected diviners who interpreted these patterns through codices and chants. The Xiapo Wali, on the other hand, was practical and ceremonial, divided into 18 months of 20 days, with 5 nameless days at the end. It governed agriculture, feasting, and imperial rituals. Each month hosted festivals to specific gods, bringing dances, offerings, and community gatherings. For example, during Itzelculisli, people honored Tlaloc with water rituals. During Panquetzalisli, warriors celebrated Huitzilopochtli's triumph. These cycles connected the celestial and the earthly. Planting corn was never just labor, but a reenactment of divine myth. Every 52 years, the two calendars completed a full cycle and realigned. This marked a new fire ceremony, an awe-inspiring event of cosmic renewal. At midnight, all fires across the empire were extinguished. The people held their breath in darkness as priests climbed a sacred hill to light a new flame atop a sacrifice chest. If the flame caught, the world was safe for another cycle. Fires were then relit in every home, symbolizing rebirth. It was one of the most spiritual and emotionally charged ceremonies of Aztec life. Time for the Aztecs was never linear. It was cyclical, sacred, and alive. The sun didn't just rise, it was reborn. Death didn't just end, it rotated into life again. Through their calendars, they understood the rhythms of gods, nature, and human fate. In every sunrise, planting season, fire ceremony, the Aztecs saw themselves not as masters of time, but as its humble companions, dancing alongside its eternal divine rhythm. Aztec education was remarkably advanced for its time and remarkably inclusive. Nearly all children, regardless of social class, received formal instruction. Boys and girls were taught separately, with teachings tailored to their future roles in society. From a young age, children were instilled with a deep sense of duty, discipline, and reverence for the gods. At home, parents educated them through oral teachings, stories, and chores designed to prepare them for life as adults. Children learned that their lives were gifts to be shaped in service of community and cosmos alike. By adolescence, boys were enrolled in either the Kalmakak or the Telpakali. The Kalmakak was reserved for the sons of nobles and priests, training future leaders, priests, and military captains. Students studied astronomy, history, religion, and oral poetry. They learned discipline through fasting, sleepless nights, and physical endurance. Meanwhile, the Telpakali educated commoners, focusing on military training, physical labor, and basic cultural knowledge. Though separated by social class, both schools aimed to mold loyal, spiritually attuned citizens. Girls were educated at home and from noble families, sometimes sent to institutions like the Cali, House of Song. There they learned sacred hymns, ritual dances, and roles as priestesses. Most girls were taught domestic skills, weaving, cooking, and child-rearing. But these tasks were never seen as mundane. Weaving, for instance, was a sacred act tied to the goddess Quetzal. Every thread symbolized cosmic order. To raise a family was to mirror the sustaining forces of the universe. In this way, womanhood was honored with divine responsibility. Music and poetry played central roles in Aztec education. These weren't extracurricular. They were sacred languages used to communicate with the divine. Students memorized complex verses that preserved the empire's history, celebrated nature, and honored the gods. In song and rhythm, young minds learned the values of beauty, truth, and balance. Education, therefore, was not merely preparation for adulthood. It was a spiritual discipline, tuning the soul to the frequency of the cosmos. Aztec education was not limited to the elite or male. It wove every child into the sacred web of society. Whether learning to wield a spear, tend a fire, recite a hymn, or grind maize, each lesson was spiritual training. The message was clear. Life was not about personal gain, but about maintaining harmony with family, nature, and gods. In classrooms and kitchens, temples and training fields, the Aztec youth were shaped into stewards of sacred world. In the heart of the Aztec cosmos stood the towering Templo Mayor, a sacred pyramid rising from the center of Tenochtitlan. More than a structure, it was a cosmic axis, the meeting point between Earth's sky and the underworld. Its two shrines at the summit were dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. This duality symbolized the Aztec understanding of balance: war and nourishment, fire and water, sacrifice and renewal. Each step of the temple was a climb into the divine. The Templo Mayor was a stage for the most important rituals in the empire, especially those involving sacrifice. To the Aztecs, sacrifice wasn't seen as cruelty but as sacred reciprocity, offering blood to nourish the gods who gave life. During great festivals like Tlacaxapualizli, warriors and captives were ritually offered to Huitzilopochtli in elaborate ceremonies involving song, dance, and processions. Sacrifices were public, dramatic, and deeply spiritual, performed not with hatred but reverence, to ensure the sun would rise again. The temple itself reflected Aztec cosmology. Each layer symbolized one of the 13 heavens above and the 9 underworld below. Offerings were buried in the temple's foundation: obsidian blades, jade masks, animal bones, and even crocodile skulls, each a portal between worlds. With every expansion of the empire, the Templo Mayor was rebuilt larger and grander, like a living mountain echoing the power of Tenochtitlan. It was the Axis Mundi, linking divine and human purpose. Priests were the stewards of this sacred space. Clad in black robes and adorned with chalky paint, they devoted their lives to fasting, praying, studying omens, and maintaining the cosmic balance. The temple echoed with the beat of drums and the calls of conch shells as smoke curled from braziers filled with copal. Ritual was constant, dawn, noon, dusk. From this spiritual heartbeat, the empire's rhythm was maintained. The temple was not just a monument, but a living participant in everyday Aztec life. The Templo Mayor was both a structure of awe and a symbol of unity. From distant provinces to the heart of the capital, all paths led to its steps. To ascend, it was approach the divine, to witness the eternal cycle of sacrifice and renewal. Even after its destruction by the Spanish, its sacred memory lived on, beneath the city, in buried stones and the whispered stories of ancestors. It remains a dream of sacred height and cosmic vision. Aztec marketplaces were vibrant centers of daily life, bustling, rhythmic, and deeply symbolic. The most famous, Tlatelolco, hosted thousands of people every day, offering goods from across the empire: food, cloth, tools, obsidian blades, gold trinkets, live animals, and rare feathers were laid out in orderly rows. Barter was a main form of exchange, though cacao beans and small cotton cloaks sometimes functioned as currency. The marketplace was more than a place to trade goods. It was where communities connected, news traveled, and society pulsed with shared life. Vendors were organized by type of good, and each section was overseen by officials to ensure fairness and quality. Inspectors walked the aisles, monitoring scales, resolving disputes, and enforcing price stability. Laws against fraud were strict, as commerce was seen as a sacred duty. Even the gods had their place here. Altars stood at key points of the market, where traders might offer thanks or pray for protection over their wares. Justice and spirituality were seamlessly woven into every transaction. Market days had a festive air. Musicians played reed flutes and drums. Dancers performed between stalls. Street performers, astrologers, and healers offered their services. Many citizens came just to socialize or listen to news from distant cities. Foreign merchants brought exotic goods like turquoise from the north or tropical bird feathers from the south. The market was where distant corners of the Aztec world met, through trade, language, and shared rituals of community. Women were essential participants in market life. They sold food, textiles, and pottery, and many were expert traders in their own right. A mother might pass down her stall and customer base to her daughter, forming a matrilineal chain of economic knowledge. In fact, women's involvement in commerce helped sustain families, especially during times of war or crop failure. In the bustling crowd, their voices, skills, and presence were central to the empire's heartbeat. The marketplace was not merely economic. It was social, spiritual, and cosmopolitan. It reflected the Aztec ideal of harmony through structure, community, and divine order. In the mingling of voices, the scent of roasted maize, the shimmer of jade and gold, one could feel the soul of Tenochtitlan. Trade was a form of diplomacy, and the market, a microcosm of the empire, diverse, vibrant, and eternally in motion. Aztec agriculture was a foundation upon which the empire stood, ingenious, sacred, and synchronized with the rhythms of nature. The land was not merely a resource. It was a living being deserving of respect and ritual. Farmers honored gods like Tlaloc, god of rain, and Chicumcotl, goddess of maize, before planting. Every season carried spiritual significance, and planting ceremonies were conducted with offerings of flowers, incense, and song. Agriculture was a sacred covenant between humans and the earth. Among the greatest innovations of the Aztecs were the chinampas, floating gardens, built on the shallow lakes around Tenochtitlan. These artificial islands were marvels of engineering. Farmers wove reed rafts, anchored them with willows, and layered them with mud compost and rich lake sediment. The result was a fertile plot of land that could yield multiple harvests a year. These fields on water were so productive that they fed the entire capital and much of the empire. Crops like maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, and amaranth formed the core of the Aztec diet and agricultural cycle. These were not just food items, but sacred symbols. The three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, were planted together in companion fields, each supporting the other's growth. Maize was a divine gift of Seniatl, the maize god, and was treated as a spiritual being. Even spilled kernels were never wasted. Every meal was a ritual in gratitude. Farming required discipline, cooperation, and family labor. Families rose before dawn, prayed, and worked side by side. Tasks were divided among the young and old, each with a role in tilling, planting, harvesting, or storing food. Feasts marked the end of successful harvests, where songs and dances thanked the earth and gods. These gatherings weren't just celebrations. They reinforced community bonds and renewed spiritual commitments to sustainability and balance. The genius of Aztec agriculture lay not just in its productivity, but in its harmony with the environment. Rather than conquering nature, they listened to it, learned from it, and honored it. Their systems of canals, chinampas, and companion planting reflect an intelligence rooted in both science and spirituality. To walk among their fields was to enter a sacred landscape where every leaf, drop, and footprint carried cosmic meaning. Education in the Aztec Empire was remarkably structured and inclusive, with a deep spiritual purpose behind learning. All children, regardless of social class, were expected to attend school, one of the few ancient civilizations to mandate such a system. The goal wasn't just to gain knowledge, but to become disciplined, respectful, and spiritually aligned. Education was seen as a sacred duty to society and the gods, and teachers were held in high esteem. The Aztecs believed the heart and mind needed shaping as much as the body. There were two main types of schools. The Kalmakak was for the children of nobles, where they learned religion, astronomy, mathematics, rhetoric, history, and governance. It was a strict environment, often associated with priests and high offices. Discipline was intense. Students were expected to rise early, fast, carry heavy loads, and practice silence. Meanwhile, the Telpakali served commoners, focusing on practical skills like farming, warfare, and crafts. Both paths, however, emphasized character and responsibility. Boys and girls both received education, though their paths diverged. Girls learn at home or in special institutions to weave, cook, care for the household, and understand ritual responsibilities. They were also taught songs, prayers, and midwifery, sacred roles tied to life and birth. Women who died in childbirth were revered as warrior spirits, equal in honor to soldiers lost in battle. Education for girls was not lesser, but aligned with the sacred feminine domain. Lessons weren't confined to buildings. They were integrated into every aspect of life. Respect for elders, speaking well, walking with humility, and honoring the gods were all taught by example. Proverbs, stories, and poetry formed a large part of instruction, shaping the heart as much as the intellect. Teachers were spiritual guides, often likened to sculptors carving the soul. Failure to learn wasn't punished with shame, but met with gentle correction and perseverance. Through education, the Aztec society cultivated harmony and order. It was not merely preparation for work, but a spiritual journey from chaos to balance. The aim was to create a Toltequero soul, wise, skilled, reflective, and humble. To be educated was to be refined like jade, carved into one's highest potential. In the stillness of an Aztec school, one could hear not just recitations, but the soft rhythm of souls being shaped toward divine ideals. Aztec art was not merely decorative. It was a language of power, spirit, and myth woven into every surface of life. From stone carvings and codices to featherwork and painted murals, Aztec visual culture expressed cosmic truths and social order. Each image was a sacred message, drawn with precision and steeped in symbolism. Artists were revered as creators of spiritual reality, crafting portals to the divine that allowed ordinary people to glimpse the invisible forces guiding their world. Featherwork was among the most exquisite forms of Aztec artistry. Artisans known as Amantica used hummingbird, quetzal, and parrot feathers to create cloaks, fans, shields, and headdresses for nobles and priests. These works were lightweight but radiant, capturing the shimmer of sunlight and symbolizing divine presence. Feathers were more than decoration. They embodied life, flight, and celestial beauty. Every arrangement followed sacred color patterns passed down through generations. Stone carving held a central role in religious and political expression. Massive sculptures like the Calendar Stone or the statue of Coatlicue were not just monuments. They were active participants in spiritual life. These carvings depicted gods, sacrifices, and cosmological myths with precise symmetry and layered meaning. Each figure, claw, or spiral held messages about time, death, creation, and rebirth. Even small household shrines bore stone idols, reminding citizens of their place within the grand cosmic cycle. Codices, folded books made of bark or animal skin, were another vital art form. Painted by Tlaquillos scribes, these books documented mythology, rituals, lineage, and tribute. They used vivid iconography instead of written words, turning each page into a visual chant. The codices were read by priests and nobles to maintain social order and teach divine law. Sadly, many were destroyed during conquest, but surviving copies offer invaluable insights into how the Aztecs viewed their world. Aztec art fused the material with the spiritual, the earthly with the divine. It was inseparable from daily life, adorning temples, clothing, pottery, and weapons alike. Every object carried meaning, from a painted bowl to a royal crown. Art was how the Aztecs remembered their myths, displayed their power, honored their gods, and preserved their identity. In every brushstroke and carved line, the heartbeat of the empire lived on. Music and dance were at the heart of Aztec spiritual and social life, living expressions of cosmic rhythm and divine connection. These performances were not simply for entertainment. They were sacred rituals, offerings to the gods performed with precision, discipline, and joy. Each movement and note carried symbolic meaning, designed to mirror celestial cycles or invoke divine presence. Temples, marketplaces, and even schools echoed with drum beats, flutes, and chants that bridged the mortal world with the divine. Drums, huehuetls, were central instruments in Aztec music, carved from tree trunks and painted with deities. Their deep, resonant tones were thought to echo the heartbeats of the gods. Teponazli, slit-log drums, created higher, melodic notes and were used for more refined performances. Rattles, flutes, whistles, and conch shells added complexity, simulating birdsong, rain, or the breath of deities. Musicians were trained for years to master the patterns and sacred rhythms for each festival or ceremony. Dance was inseparable from music. Each step a prayer, each rotation an invocation. Entire communities would rehearse elaborate dances for major festivals, often continuing for days. Dancers wore costumes that reflected the deity being honored, becoming living embodiments of gods like Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, or Zacapili. Bells on ankles, feathers on headdresses, and painted faces created a hypnotic spectacle that transcended the ordinary and opened spiritual gateways between worlds. Chanting and song were equally powerful. Ritual hymns, often in Nahuatl poetry, praised the gods, recounted myths, or asked for blessings. These songs were passed down orally, their meanings layered in metaphor and divine reference. Priests led sacred chants, while communities joined in refrains that resonated across courtyards and valleys. Singing was believed to purify the soul, align hearts with cosmic order, and open portals to ancestral wisdom. Through music and dance, the Aztecs celebrated life, marked time, and entered sacred communion with the universe. These art forms sustained collective identity and reaffirmed the moral and spiritual codes that held society together. In the silence that followed the festival's final drumbeat, the air still shimmered with energy, reminding all who had witnessed or participated that they had touched the divine, if only for a moment. The Aztec calendar was not just a way to measure time. It was a cosmic blueprint, a sacred rhythm that guided the universe in every aspect of life. The Aztecs used two main calendars: the Tanaupuali, a 260-day ritual calendar used for divination, and the Xiapohualli, a 365-day solar calendar that organized agricultural and religious cycles. These two systems interlocked like gears, forming a 52-year century, at the end of which time itself was believed to be vulnerable to destruction and renewal. The Tanaupuali consisted of 20 day signs combined with 13 numbers, resulting in 260 unique combinations. Each day was ruled by specific gods and held distinct fates. Aztec priests, or Tonopuk, interpreted these signs to determine everything from naming a child to choosing a wedding date or launching a military campaign. This calendar reflected the sacred energy cycles of the gods. It was not linear, but cyclical, echoing birth, growth, decay, and rebirth. The Xiapohualli, the solar calendar, contained 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 nameless days considered unlucky. Each month had its own festivals and deities, aligning with agricultural tasks like planting, harvesting, and rain calling. Seasonal ceremonies ensured harmony with nature, with feasts dedicated to maize, water, or fire. Farmers, priests, and rulers all planned their duties according to the sacred clock, ensuring the empire functioned in tune with the cosmos. The new fire ceremony, held every 52 years, marked the end of a full cycle and the potential end of the world. On this night, all fires were extinguished, homes were cleaned, and hearts were filled with dread and hope. Priests climbed a sacred mountain and reignited a fire on a sacrificial victim's chest. From this flame, all hearts in the empire were relit, symbolizing cosmic renewal and humanity's continued survival. For the Aztecs, time was alive. It flowed in cycles, pulsed with divine energy, and demanded balance. To live out of sync with these cycles was to invite chaos. The calendar didn't just organize days. It revealed purpose, destiny, and spiritual alignment. In every festival, harvest, and heartbeat, the rhythm of the gods played on, echoing the great truth that time was sacred and every moment mattered. At the heart of the Aztec Empire stood Tenochtitlan, a breathtaking city built on water, shimmering like a dream atop Lake Texcoco. Founded in 1325 after a prophetic vision of an eagle perched on a cactus, it became the pulsing center of religion, trade, politics, and military power. With canals instead of roads, Chinampas for farming, and grand temples rising from the mist, it was often called the Venice of the New World, a place where the mundane and the divine walked hand in hand. The city was laid out with incredible order and symbolism. Its 4 main quadrants radiated from the center, like the cardinal directions of the universe. At the sacred core stood the Templo Mayor, a towering double pyramid dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, gods of war and rain. This temple mirrored the Aztec worldview, a vertical axis linking earth, underworld, and heavens. From every direction, citizens could see its silhouette against the sky, a daily reminder of divine presence. Commerce flowed endlessly through Tenochtitlan. Its markets, like the famed Tlatelolco, attracted thousands daily. Merchants sold cacao, obsidian, textiles, jade, maize, and even exotic animals. Trade was more than economics. It was diplomacy, alliance, and ritual. Paktika, Elite merchant guilds traveled vast distances and often acted as spies and emissaries. Every item carried cultural weight. Every exchange was a dance of respect, value, and meaning. Tenochtitlan's infrastructure was astonishing. Aqueducts brought fresh water from the Chapultepec springs. Raised roads, causeways, connected the island to the mainland, dotted with drawbridges. Canals served as watery streets, where canoes glided silently between districts. Chinampas, floating gardens, turned the lake into fertile farmland. Even waste management, education, and hospitals were part of the city's design, showing how the Aztecs balanced spiritual devotion with engineering brilliance. Tenochtitlan wasn't merely a capital. It was a living cosmogram. Every stone, canal, and ceremony mirrored the divine order of the universe. It was built not just to house people, but to honor gods, channel energies, and keep time. In its radiant symmetry and sacred geometry, the Aztecs believed they had created the center of the world, a city that stood between the stars and the earth, timeless in its grandeur. In the grand society of the Aztecs, social order was upheld by a hierarchy that blended divine mandate with earthly duty. From humble farmers to elite priests and warriors, each class had a role that contributed to the empire's harmony. This structure wasn't merely political, it was spiritual. The gods had assigned every person station, and fulfilling one's duties meant aligning with cosmic balance. To live honorably in your class was not just good citizenship, it was sacred obedience. At the top stood the Huitzilopochtli, the great speaker, both king and high priest. He was seen as chosen by the gods to guide the people, interpret divine will, and lead in war. Below him were nobles, priests, judges, and military leaders. Each held considerable power, but also strict responsibilities. Their actions influenced the spiritual fate of the empire. Even the smallest decision was weighed against its cosmic consequence. Artisans and merchants formed the middle stratum, holding prestige through skill and enterprise. Craftspeople fashioned intricate jewelry, sculpture, and weaponry, while traders moved goods and culture across vast distances. Some merchant guilds were so powerful they rivaled the nobility. These individuals were often seen as bridges between classes, between cities, even between gods, bringing wealth and wisdom from afar back to the capital's heart. Most Aztecs were commoners, farmers, fishers, builders. They formed the foundation society, growing maize, raising children, and performing temple duties. Their lives were hard, yet deeply spiritual. They participated in local festivals, honored household gods, and passed down oral history with reverence. Even they had mobility. Bravery in war or exceptional service could elevate someone into the noble class, a reminder that virtue was a form of currency in the Aztec world. Slaves, or Tlacotin, occupied the lowest tier, but their status was more flexible than in many other ancient societies. Slavery was not always permanent, and was often a result of debt or punishment. Some could earn freedom, and slaves had rights, marriage, property, and legal protection. In rare cases, a slave could even gain prestige or become a priest. This fluidity reflected the Aztec belief that fate was dynamic, not fixed. One's path could shift, guided by virtue, wisdom, or will of the gods. The arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century marked the twilight of the Aztec world. When Hernán Cortés landed in 1519, he found an empire of complexity and magnificence, but also one divided by internal rivalries and unrest. Some indigenous groups, long resentful of Aztec dominance, allied with the Spaniards. What began as cautious diplomacy soon turned into confrontation. The world of God, sacrifice, and cycles was about to collide with a force that would not honor its rules. When Cortés entered Tenochtitlan, he was awestruck. The city's floating gardens, soaring temples, and structured beauty rivaled any European capital. Yet beneath the surface lay tension. Moctezuma II, the emperor, welcomed Cortés, uncertain whether he was a mortal or a divine messenger. This miscalculation would prove fatal. The Spanish soon took the emperor hostage, using him as a puppet while tensions escalated among the Aztec people. In 1520, the fragile peace shattered during the Feast of Toxcatl, when Spanish forces massacred Aztec nobles and priests mid-ceremony. Uprising followed. Moctezuma died, perhaps by Spanish hands, perhaps by his own people. The Spanish fled the city in what became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. But they would return with allies, cannons, and a devastating force the Aztecs could not predict. Smallpox, which decimated the population even before the final battle began. The siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521 was brutal and unrelenting. For months, the once proud city starved and crumbled under assault. Aqueducts were cut, bridges destroyed, and temples fell. Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor, fought valiantly but was ultimately captured. The city of the gods, the heart of cosmic order, fell into ruin. Its temples were razed, its stones repurposed to build colonial structures. A world ended, not with a fading whisper, but with fire and steel. Yet the spirit of the Aztecs did not vanish. It lived on in the hearts of descendants, in the Nahuatl language, in hidden rituals and whispered stories. Today, their legacy is rediscovered through archaeology, literature, and living culture. The echoes of their songs and ceremonies still ripple through time. Their gods, their calendars, their dreams, they survive not just in ruins, but in memory. What was lost may never return, but it can be remembered, and remembering is a kind of rebirth.